Hi, and welcome to the Chapter 3 podcast. This ice cream looks really yummy, but this is not about ice cream. This is about the chemistry of life, and especially the macromolecules of life. And so when you look at me, what you're really looking at is proteins and the results of protein action. And so this is what a protein looks like. This is the protein that actually carries oxygen around in your blood. And this is Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling he was an amazing scientist, and he ciphered out a lot of the structures of some of these macromolecules. Right now he's sitting next to a model of alpha helix. A lot of scientists thought he would discover the structure of DNA, but he didn't. Organic chemistry is the study of carbon compounds. This is another scientist, famous scientist named Stanley Miller. He published an article in 1953 showing that he was able to create the building blocks of life in the laboratory, suggesting that maybe life could have arisen this way. Regardless of how life came to be, we know that it's based on carbon because it's a really good bonder. Two terms I want to talk about. Number one is hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbon happens when you have a bunch of carbon atoms attached together, and then you have a hydrogen around the outside. Now, a really important hydrocarbon in our lives is gasoline, but fat is another one, and this would be methane gas right here. Any hydrocarbon is really good at storing energy, and that energy is in the form of the hydrogen. Isomer is another term that you should be familiar with. Isomer is when you have a molecule that has the same number of atoms, but it's built in a different way. And so this right here is isobutane. Isobutane looks just like butane. You could build butane by moving this carbon over here to the end of this chain and then swapping one of your hydrogens. Isobutane burns just like butane, behaves the same way. But sometimes you have consequences that aren't so simple. This is thalidomide. Thalidomide was discovered, and what they found is it was like this wonder drug. You could take thalidomide when you were pregnant and you had morning sickness, and the morning sickness would simply go away. What they didn't realize is that they were making thalidomide, but an isomer of that was being created as well, and that was it caused severe birth defects. And so you would have, I didn't even want to include the pictures on here, they're that disturbing. Anyway, this is Kennedy here with Dr. Frances Kelly, and what she had finally, she worked for the FDA and finally had said, identified this issue and banned the use of thalidomide. But it's still one of the tragedies of modern day medicine. Now this term, I would stop here for a second and tell you this, is in AP biology, you simply have to memorize these functional groups. In other words, everything's built out of these nice carbon chains, but we have a few things that are added on the outside of it, and what they do is give it kind of you could think of it as giving it a superpower, if you want to think of it that way. And so memorize the structure and what they cause. And so the first one is an oxygen with a hydrogen. We call that a hydroxyl group. If you attach it onto something, it becomes alcohol. So this is like ethanol right here. Really easy to dissolve in water if you're in alcohol. We have a carbonyl group. Carbonyl group is going to be a carbon double bond to an oxygen. If it's found within the molecule, at the end of the molecule, we call that an aldehyde, like formaldehyde. If it's found within it, we call it a ketone. Next is a carboxyl group. We've got a carbon attached to a oxygen, double bonded, and then we have a hydroxyl group coming off this side. This is a carboxyl group. If you add that in an organic molecule, we get what's called a carboxylic acid. Example could be vinegar, pictured to the left. Next is an amino group. An amino group is a nitrogen with two hydrogens attached on the outside. Amino groups are really important because they form amino acids, which make proteins, which again make us. This is kind of some of those amino acids. And that's why we need nitrogen to live. Everything needs nitrogen to live, to make the amino acids. Next we have the phosphate group. Phosphate group is a phosphorus with oxygen around the outside of it. Really important, I had mentioned before, an ATP, which is our energy currency. And then finally we have a methyl group. Methyl group is going to be a carbon with three hydrogens attached to it. And so we're finding that methyl groups are really important. What they can do is they can methylate DNA, and essentially what that does is wad it up. Okay, the way that big molecules are put together are with smaller molecules, and those smaller molecules we call monomers. And so think of it like this. A book is written, but it's made up of letters, and so the letters inside that book are like the monomers, but you can create, these great works of literature, and think of that more like a polymer. Now, the way they're strung together is this. If you have a monomer and it's attaching onto a string, and we lose a water, we call that a dehydration. So think of it as losing water. You're dehydrated, so we're losing that water, and then it'll attach that monomer onto the end. And so we can grow big chains. We can also break those chains apart. So like when I'm digesting DNA, for example, inside my gut, I'm adding water to it, and we call that hydrolysis, or breaking with water, and we can break that up into monomers, which I can then weave again. And so in a protein, we've got monomers, which are amino acids. In DNA, we have monomers, which are called nucleotides. And then in carbohydrates, we have monomers, and those are called sugars. And so what I've just mentioned are the 4 macromolecules, and so you should have an understanding of these 4. Those are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Start with carbohydrates. What do? They provide energy for us. And so these are the sugars. They come in 3 different flavors. You can be monosaccharide. Example is glucose, and that is the energy supply of life. We use it in respiration to release energy, and it's created in photosynthesis. We also have disaccharides. So this is a picture right here of sucrose, which is a glucose attached to a fructose, and we have to have enzymes to break that down. And then we finally have polysaccharides. And so when you say, is a carbohydrate a sugar? Yeah, but spaghetti is like literally thousands of glucose molecules attached together. And so we can use that for energy. We can break it down and then get energy out of it, but we can also make things out of it. So for example, the cellulose inside a tree, or the chitin that makes up the scorpion's exoskeleton, is carbohydrate. Next are the fats, or the lipids. Lipids are hydrocarbons. Hopefully you remember what those are, and so they store a lot of energy. They come in 2 different types. We can have saturated and unsaturated. If you're unsaturated, you're not saturated with hydrogen, and so you get a kink in your tail. Since you have a kink in your tail, you're going to be a liquid at room temperature. If you're saturated, we add hydrogen to it, and so at room temperature it's going to be flat, it's going to be stacked, and it's going to be a solid. Now, one of the most important lipids we have are what are called phospholipids. Phospholipids make up our cell membrane. We'll talk more about them later. Next are the proteins. Proteins, again, make us the way we are. They're made up of amino acids, and there are 20 total amino acids that we have. If we look back on it, what do we have? We've got a carbon attached to an amino group on one side, a hydrogen, and then a carboxyl group on the other side, and then we have an R group here. An R group is going to vary, and so this is how amino acids differ. It's what's placed right here. But when we attach those amino acids together, we form a peptide bond, and if we attach all those amino acids together, then we create this beautiful protein, and that protein makes us the way we are. Now, the way it's put together is they have essentially 4 levels of packing. First, you got to put the amino acids in the right way. Then they'll wind into these things called alpha helices and beta pleated sheets. Then they'll have these other interactions where you have like disulfide bridges. We have van der Waals interactions, and it gives it this 3-dimensional shape. And then finally, sometimes you'll have quaternary structure where you have not only one protein, but a number of proteins that are kind of fitting together. And so, for example, this protein inside my skin that makes it bounce back in, or in my eye, that clear protein, crystalline in my lens allows me to see, all has to do with its structure. The last ones then are the nucleic acids, and these are the hereditary material. They're made up of nucleotides, and they come in 2 different types. We've got deoxyribonucleic acid, otherwise known as DNA, and then we have RNA. We think RNA evolved first, but it eventually was upgraded to DNA, and RNA still has a role. And so if I could say, what is the central dogma of all of biology? In other words, what is this one guiding principle? It kind of ties all of these together. And so the secret of life is this. Inside the nucleus we have DNA. That DNA message is coded to messenger RNA, which leaves the nuclei, goes out into the cytoplasm, where a ribosome takes that message that was originally in the DNA and strings amino acids together to eventually make a protein. Now that protein folds into its specific shape and then makes you the way you are. And so the code for life is contained in the DNA, but the stuff of life is proteins.